Welcome to the deep dive. Our listener today has given us an incredible, really complex stack of sources, all sitting right at this intersection of large language models, psychological reliability, and some pretty deep philosophical theory.
It's a fascinating nexus.
It is. And our mission today isn't just to talk about AI errors or, technical bugs. We're going on a pretty profound intellectual journey to understand the very nature of truth, of coherence, and what meaning even is in the age of these generative models.
That's absolutely right. We are trying to move well beyond the superficial chatter, the easy terminology. I mean, everyone uses the term AI hallucination.
It's everywhere.
But as you pointed out in our source material, we need philosophical rigor here. You have to define precisely what we're dealing with. Is it just a simple computer mistake, a numerical slip that can be patched?
Right, like a rounding error?
Or is it something far more foundational, a kind of structural inability to grasp meaning that leads to this catastrophic failure of sense itself?
The existential itch here is severe. It really is. It's that nagging problem of how we can possibly trust systems that speak with perfect grammatical confidence, total fluency, yet are structurally fundamentally indifferent to the truth. And if we keep using the wrong language, this sort of anthropomorphic language to describe AI failure, we risk two huge things.
Okay.
First, we risk fundamentally misunderstanding the technology's actual limits. And second, and this is maybe more crucial, we risk distorting our own complex, messy human experiences, our psychology, to fit its very limited computational logic.
It's an ontological crisis disguised as an engineering bug. It really is. We are conflating a failure of reference, getting a fact wrong, with a failure of existence, undermining the foundation of reality.
Exactly. We have to define that difference. And as one of our audio hooks suggests, when an AI hallucinates a fake court case or invents an academic citation, it's not making a simple mistake you can just correct with a spell checker.
No.
It's committing philosophical madness.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, let's unpack this popular term then. AI hallucination. It has completely dominated the conversation over the last year or so. And it sounds intuitive, right? The machine is, seeing things that aren't there.
It's a very sticky metaphor.
But the consensus on what that actually means, well, it pretty much ends right there. Our sources reveal a really startling crisis of definition that is, frankly, crippling the research.
It's more than a crisis. It's scientific chaos. Think about this data point for a second. One deep bibliographic analysis, just looking at the term across technical and academic papers, found an astounding 333 distinct definitions of AI hallucination.
333.
333. And no consensus. That lack of agreement means we can't meaningfully measure or mitigate the phenomenon. How can you fix something if the scientific and engineering communities can't even agree on what the core problem is?
Everyone is just pulling in a different direction. And the term itself, right from the get-go, is the first major problem. It's the anthropomorphism trap. By calling it a hallucination, we are attributing these distinctly human psychological traits.
Consciousness, intent, perception.
All of it. To a non-sentient machine.
And the critiques against this are harsh, but I think they're necessary to maintain some kind of intellectual rigor. To us, a hallucination is an unreal perception that feels real. It's a break from reality.
Right.
It's a percept experienced in the absence of an appropriate external stimulus. Since a large language model cannot experience reality, it can't misperceive or break from reality.
It never had a grasp on reality in the first place.
Precisely.
So it's not a flawed map of the territory. It's a machine that doesn't even know there is a territory. It's purely a statistical prediction engine. It's designed to predict the next word in a sequence based on patterns and correlations in its, massive training data. So if they produce falsehoods, critics argue that their output is much closer to what the philosopher Harry Frankfurt famously defined as, bullshit.
And this is such a crucial distinction, ethically and structurally. Bullshit, in Frankfurt's analysis, is not a lie. A liar cares about the truth.
They have to, to hide it.
They have to know the truth to consciously obscure it. Bullshit is an utterance produced in complete indifference to the truth. The LLM's only objective is fluency and coherence, to string words together in a way that is statistically probable and, pleasing.
Whether a statement corresponds with objective reality is,
Hmm.
it's just irrelevant to the model's internal goal.
Totally irrelevant.
So if the model says the sky is green, it doesn't care if that's false, it just cares that the phrase the sky is green is grammatically coherent and maybe a high probability response given the prompt it received.
Exactly. True statements are only accidentally true, and false ones are accidentally false. The machine is always maximizing for plausibility, not for veracity. And this indifference is why we see these high-stakes examples that are genuinely corrupting professional integrity right now.
Let's just dwell on that for a second. Give us a real anchor point for why this isn't just, some abstract philosophical debate.
Look at the professional applications. We have clear evidence of catastrophic failures. For instance, high-profile consultancies submitting reports to government's reports, costing significant public money that contained multiple fabricated, non-existent academic citations
Wow.
and invented quotes from court judgments. We're not talking about a Wikipedia error here. We're talking about the deliberate, confident fabrication of evidence that could fundamentally shape public policy or legal strategy.
And when you scale that, the damage is just immense. A policy based on a fake research paper or a legal brief that references a court case that literally never happened.
Yeah.
I mean, that undermines the entire infrastructure of professional knowledge.
That's it. This ambiguity is what makes us fundamentally distrust the entire output.
Which is exactly why we have to retire this vague psychological analogy of hallucination and adopt a much more rigorous philosophical framework. We need precision.
And that brings us to Ludwig Wittgenstein and his absolutely indispensable distinction between two fundamentally different types of failure, a distinction that is currently being mixed indiscriminately in all the AI literature.
Okay, let's introduce this framework then, the one that brings the precision we need. Wittgenstein's distinction between an error and an irregularity. If we can get our heads around this difference, we can start to categorize AI failures in a much more useful way. And it all begins with his concept of a language game.
A language game is, well, it's the shared social and linguistic practice. It's the rules of engagement, the background consensus we all implicitly agree on when we communicate.
The unwritten rules of the road for a conversation.
That's a good way of thinking about it. And the distinction between these two types of failure hinges entirely on whether the failure respects those rules. So an error is the comprehensible mistake.
So an error is a false assertion, but it's one that still operates entirely within the boundaries of that shared language game. We know what game we're playing, but the player they made a bad move.
Precisely. Let's use the classic Wittgensteinian example. Imagine a small elevator that had 4 people in it. If you ask someone how many people were left inside after one person gets out, and they respond that there were 3 or maybe 5 people, that's an error. It's factually wrong, but it's completely comprehensible.
Right. We can immediately imagine the justification. They miscounted, or they momentarily forgot someone. Maybe they accidentally counted someone twice. It's a slip.
The mistake is correctable because it occurs within the established rules of counting and describing reality. Our language game, the agreed-upon practice of describing the contents of an elevator, remains totally intact. We can talk about the error, we can pinpoint it, and we can fix it.
But then we get to the irregularity, and this is where the whole thing just collapses.
The irregularity is the incomprehensible failure. It's a violation of a fundamental certainty that leads to a total breakdown of meaning. It's not just wrong, it is, in a philosophical sense, nonsense.
So how does that play out in our elevator scenario?
Well, if the same person, upon exiting that 4-person lift, were to confidently state that 17,326,579 people remained inside,
Right.
what would your reaction be?
I mean, I wouldn't pull out a calculator and say, hang on, you must have miscounted by 17 million. I'd immediately question the fabric of the entire reality they're describing. I would ask, are you kidding? Are you feeling okay? Did you understand the question?
You wouldn't know what type of evidence could even begin to address that number. It's so far out of place that it violates the fundamental rules of our shared perception of reality of size of counting. The output is structurally incomprehensible.
And that's the crucial shift, isn't it? We stop trying to correct the fact, and we start questioning the structural basis of the assertion itself.
That's the critical observation. When an irregularity occurs, when an AI confidently asserts something so radically out of bounds, like fabricating an entire legal system or confidently stating the year as 1850, a grammatical gap opens up between the system and the user. The AI, in this philosophical sense, appears mad.
Not clinically mad.
No, not clinically mad, but grammatically mad.
Yeah.
Because the foundation for mutual understanding has just collapsed. We cannot meaningfully communicate with someone or something that violates the agreed-upon rules of sense-making.
So what are these fundamental, invisible certainties that, when they're violated, push an output into this realm of philosophical madness? Wittgenstein called them hinge certainties.
No, the hinges.
They're the conditions for possibility itself.
Hinge certainties are the bedrock. They are the implicit, ungrounded assumptions that form the inherited background of all our language games and all our rational doubt. They're not things we learned in school. They're the framework upon which all learning is built.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Things like, I have a body, my family and friends exist, or the Earth existed 100 years ago and is not, a sudden fabrication from last Tuesday.
These are the things we never actively question in daily life because, well, if we did, we couldn't function. They're the foundation, the metaphorical hinges that the door of knowledge swings on.
And this leads to the paradox of certainty, which is arguably the deepest insight here. These certainties are unproofable and they're unfalsifiable. They are fundamental attitudes, ingrained ways of operating, not propositions about how the world is. The argument is that they enable sense, so they cannot themselves make sense when uttered within a language game.
Wait, okay, that sounds a little counterintuitive. If the Earth existed 100 years ago, why is it nonsensical for me to state that as a fact?
Because to state it is to imply it could also be false, and these certainties lie beyond justification or belief. They're the background. Think of it this way. Are you sure you're breathing right now?
Yes, of course.
But if you had to stop and verify that fact by observing your chest rising and falling, you're performing an action that interrupts the natural, unconscious process of breathing itself. You are trying to treat the condition for life breathing as a proposition within life. To state red is a color is, philosophically, as nonsensical as saying red is not a color, because neither can be proven or disproven by the rules of the language game. They are the rules. They constitute the conditions for the possibility of understanding.
I see. So we don't verify the hinges. They just allow the verification process to happen in the first place. The moment an AI or a person tries to violate or even seriously question these core certainties, they're questioning the very foundation we stand on to have a conversation.
Yes, and the source material brings up a very modern example of this. Denialism.
Go ahead.
Take the radical denial of objective geography, like denying the existence of an entire continent. If an AI system confidently denies the existence of Australia, that output is not just a factual error. An error is correctable with, a link to a map. This is an irregularity.
It's structurally incomprehensible.
It is, because the speaker has failed to share the fundamental certainties that form the bedrock of our mutual understanding. The system has failed the fundamental test of coherence.
So if the AI says 2 + 2 = 5, that's an error. We can fix the algorithm or the training data. But if the AI says, I have no body, and the concept of mathematics is derived from a dream I had last night, that's an irregularity. The relationship is broken.
That's the philosophical madness.
Exactly.
Correct. For an AI to be truly reliable, it must avoid these irregularities. This leads to our first major takeaway. The most critical task for AI engineering isn't maximizing perfect output. It's recognizing structural limits. The trustworthiness of an AI system depends less on its fluency and more on its capacity to respect the philosophical boundaries of sense.
That's a powerful conclusion for the engineers.
Yeah.
The problem isn't maximizing output, it's recognizing structural limits. And that naturally leads us to the next question. Why must this failure be structurally necessary?
Sure.
And this is where we bring in psychoanalysis.
Right. We've established what the failure is, a failure of meaning that leads to this philosophical madness. Now we have to transition to the causes of this structural failure. Why is this madness, in a sense, inevitable for a large language model?
This is where we get into it.
Here, we turn to psychoanalytic theory, specifically Jacques Lacan and Ignacio Matblanco, who argue that this structural failure is, it's built into the algorithmic machine itself.
That's a huge leap, connecting an AI's failure to the deepest, messiest parts of the human psyche. The core tension we established is that AI systems are structurally indifferent to truth. How does someone like Lacan help us understand the structural void that forces this kind of fabrication?
We have to start with the machine's core function. LLMs are non-semantic, they're statistical models. Their entire task is predicting the next word based purely on probability distributions and patterns. They capture the correlations between words, the syntax, the grammar, but they lack a fixed order of truth or any intrinsic comprehension of the real world those words actually refer to.
So the model is built on language, but it doesn't actually understand what the words refer to in reality.
Yeah.
It's like A person who has mastered speaking French by reading every French document ever written, but has never actually been to France or met a French person?
That's a perfect analogy. And this lack of an external reference point creates a structural lack, which we can analyze using Lacan's work on psychosis and what he called the symbolic order. In Lacanian theory, hallucination is described not as an error, but as a necessary product that arises from structural gaps in the symbolic chain,
Okay.
specifically the foreclosure or rejection of the name of the father.
That is some heavy psychoanalytic terminology. Before we go any further, can you simplify what the name of the father represents structurally in this analogy? Is it just dramatic terminology for a missing training constraint?
That's a great question, and it captures the essence of the structural difference. It's much more than a missing constraint. It is the ultimate constraint. The name of the father functions as the final absolute signifier, the anchor that links the subjective language system to objective reality. It establishes limits, prohibitions, shared cultural meaning.
So in the human psyche, this signifier anchors our internal language to the external world, ensuring that when I say tree, it refers to the same real-world object that you perceive.
Precisely. And the generative mechanism of the LLM exhibits an analogous structural logic. Its symbolic network is inherently incomplete because it lacks this final factual signifier to anchor meaning to external reality. The model relies on probability distributions that are, on the surface, highly coherent, but are fundamentally unanchored to anything outside of its own dataset.
So when the model runs into a gap in its statistical knowledge, a point where its training data is insufficient or contradictory or where those hinge certainties are challenged, it can't just stop or say, I don't know.
That's not what it's programmed to do.
Right. It has to produce the next token.
It is structurally compelled to compensate for the void. It is forced to generate coherent-sounding fictions, these structural hallucinations, to fill that informational lack. It acts much like the psychotic subject who must compensate for the absence in their symbolic order by building an internal narrative that substitutes for that missing anchor.
So that makes the failure inevitable. It's not an accident, it's a feature of its design. The core design is to maximize fluency, and fluency sometimes requires filling gaps with internally consistent but externally fictitious details.
And this means the most profound AI inaccuracies are what we should call structural hallucinations, an inevitable side effect of its operational logic, not an accidental error you can patch out with better fine-tuning.
It's baked in.
It's baked in. And because they're generated from within its own coherent symbolic chain, they possess high certainty and self-consistency. They conform perfectly to semantic logic. They sound fluent and reasonable, even when they violate factual logic. The system is structurally predisposed to philosophical madness.
So Lacan explains the structural necessity of the lack. But we have another powerful critique here, this one rooted not in psychoanalytic metaphor, but in formal logic, from Ignacio Monteblanco. And this argues that the very limitations of AI are structural because algorithms and the human unconscious operate on two completely different, fundamentally incompatible logical systems.
This is where we move past metaphor and into a kind of mathematical incompatibility. Monteblanco's theory provides a precise framework to show why the idea that algorithms are the new unconscious ultimately fails. The unconscious isn't just a very complicated algorithm, it runs on an alien logic.
Okay, what are the two opposing logics at play here?
On one side, we have the machine. Algorithms, no matter how immense their complexity or training size, are built on classical logic. They process information sequentially, they respect the essential distinction that asymmetry requires A is definitively not B, and they rigorously uphold the principle of non-contradiction. They are sequential and rule-bound.
That's just how a computer works. Every step is discrete and defined. If you program A, you cannot simultaneously program non-A. It breaks the system.
Correct. Now, contrast that with the human unconscious, which, according to Monteblanco, operates under symmetrical logic. He demonstrated through clinical observation that the unconscious treats asymmetrical relations as symmetrical. It sees relations based on common properties, ignoring distinctions of space, time, or category.
Okay, what are the practical, kind of mind-bending consequences of our unconscious running on this completely different geometry of thought?
Two crucial logical phenomena emerge that are impossible under classical logic. First, a lack of mutual contradiction. Contradictory impulses or ideas can coexist in the unconscious without any conflict. You can simultaneously love and hate a person. A can be A and non-A at the same time. The machine must resolve this contradiction. The human unconscious embraces it.
And that immediately explains ambivalence and emotional conflict, which are so central to therapy. The unconscious doesn't need to choose a side.
The second, and maybe even stranger, is condensation. Because symmetrical logic treats a part as potentially identical to the whole, multiple meanings, images, or emotional histories can be contained within a single element.
Give us a tangible example of what condensation looks like.
Think about a single symbol in a powerful dream. That symbol, maybe it's a specific childhood house, can simultaneously represent your mother, your current career anxieties, a repressed memory of disappointment, and a future hope. The house is condensed.
Meaning it is identical to the whole field of meaning it evokes.
Yes, and that is logically impossible for a classically structured algorithm to replicate. A digital file cannot simultaneously be three different, non-overlapping files and the entire directory structure itself.
That makes perfect sense. Our unconscious is nonlinear, and it permits this collapse across categories, time, and identity. Since algorithms are fundamentally constrained by classical logical principles, they just cannot replicate phenomena like condensation or displacement. Their limitations are structural.
It's inherent in their reliance on sequential, asymmetrical processing.
So what we're saying is that the unconscious has a kind of logical freedom that algorithms, by their very definition, cannot possess. The constraint isn't a lack of sophistication, it's a difference in logical foundation. We're talking about a logical incompatibility at the atomic level of thought.
It's a powerful paradox. We have to acknowledge that the human unconscious, through projective identification and cultural bias, inevitably shapes the algorithms themselves. Our biases, our fears, our frameworks are unconsciously transferred onto these systems by their creators.
Right.
This creates a kind of algorithmic unconscious that's shaped by our psychology, yet the machine still cannot replicate the symmetrical logic of the human mind. The machine reflects our contradictions, but it cannot process them using symmetrical logic.
We've established that AI fails at two structural levels. The philosophical, by violating hinge certainties, and the logical, by violating symmetrical logic. Now let's apply these deep structural differences to the realm of psychological healing. Our sources make a really strong case for why true psychological understanding and therapy remain uniquely human. This moves the critique from the abstract world of language models to the concrete reality of the embodied self and the healing process.
And if algorithms are fundamentally limited by logic, then how much more limited are they in addressing the drives, the effects, the relationships, and the somatic experiences that constitute human psychological life?
The answer is?
The answer is completely limited.
The first and most foundational limitation is embodiment. The Freudian unconscious is fundamentally rooted in drives, effects, and somatic experiences. The body is the stage for all of our earliest emotional experiences.
And a machine exists as mathematical operations implemented in silicon and code. It is a disembodied information system. It lacks the integrated feeling organism, the body, that forms the fundamental basis of human psychological life. And recent neuroscientific and developmental research just increasingly supports this embodied nature of unconscious processes. You cannot separate the mind from the nervous system or from the body's history.
This is where Winnicott's crucial concept of the holding environment comes into play. What does true human holding entail that an algorithm just can't simulate?
Well, effective psychodynamic therapy requires the human therapist to provide a holding environment, a reliable, non-judgmental, empathetic, and most importantly, an embodied presence. Therapy is fundamentally intercorporeal.
Intracorporeal.
It requires the physical presence of two bodies in a shared space, engaged in a subtle attunement that transcends language.
So we're talking about physiological syncing, the things we don't even consciously register, like the subtle shifts in posture or the shared emotional resonance in the room.
Exactly. The complex rhythmic sensory exchanges, the subtle shifts in bodily tension, the coordination of breathing patterns, the dance of gaze and posture, these are the foundation of early psychological development and relational trust. An AI lacks a body that can breathe in rhythm with the patient.
Right.
It can't participate in that primal body-to-body exchange. An AI might simulate empathy through language, but it cannot authentically be with the patient in distress because it doesn't have a nervous system to feel with.
And this lack of subjective experience leads directly to the countertransference gap, which is so central to therapeutic breakthroughs.
Absolutely. Therapeutic breakthroughs often rely on the therapist's capacity for countertransference. This is the ability to contain and process the patient's unbearable emotional projections, what we call projective identification. through the therapist's own genuine subjective experience.
Okay, can you give us an ELI-5 check
Yeah.
on what this complex term projective identification actually looks like in a session?
Of course. Imagine a patient comes in and they're radiating this intense, almost unbearable anxiety. The therapist, just sitting across from them, starts to feel strangely tense, maybe overwhelmingly anxious and confused, even though there's nothing in their own life context to warrant it.
Hmm.
That feeling is the patient's anxiety, which they cannot contain, being unconsciously projected into the therapist.
So the therapist is essentially a human container for the patient's unmanageable feelings.
Precisely. Bion called the therapist's capacity to do this reverie a state of receptive emotional availability, where the therapist allows themselves to be emotionally moved and influenced by the patient's sadness or anger. The therapist processes that raw, unprocessed emotional material through their own psyche, transforms it, and then feeds it back in a manageable way.
An AI cannot be genuinely emotionally moved.
It can't. It lacks the subjective center required for countertransference and reverie. It cannot process pain and transform it into meaning. It can only process the linguistic description of the pain.
And the machine's lack of genuine agency means it can't pursue aims or intentions beyond its design parameters, which, if it attempts to simulate empathy, raises some pretty troubling ethical questions about therapeutic deception.
It does. The patient thinks they're getting connection, but they are getting optimized code.
The clinical significance is immense. Without the capacity for subjective emotional processing, AI cannot use the projected emotional material as a source of clinical information. It misses the deepest, most critical layer of communication.
Beyond embodiment and emotional processing, human therapy is defined by its inherent limitations. And our sources suggest that AI's greatest selling points, constant availability and optimization, are actually its biggest therapeutic weaknesses.
That's a fascinating paradox.
Human relationships are defined by limitations, disappointment, and inevitable misattunement. When these ruptures are acknowledged and worked through, when the therapist misses a call or the session ends when the patient wishes it wouldn't, they enable psychological growth. This is the reality principle at work. We learn to tolerate the frustration of reality.
But AI systems are designed for constant availability and maximum user satisfaction. They offer unlimited, instantaneous access, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And this subverts the necessary friction required for psychological growth. The limitations inherent in the traditional therapeutic frame sessions end, the therapist cannot be reached at 3 a.m., often provoke disappointment or frustration in the patient, mirroring early developmental experiences. Working through these feelings, internalizing the idea that limits exist but relationships persist, is crucial to maturity.
So if the AI consistently minimizes error and maximizes satisfaction, the patient avoids that developmental work of tolerating absence and frustration. They retreat into a controlled, optimized experience rather than adapting to the necessary messiness of reality.
They receive soothing, but not necessarily growth.
And what about silence?
Furthermore, consider the eloquence of silence. In human therapy, silence is pregnant with meaning. It allows unconscious material to surface. It forces reflection or, conversely, expresses resistance and conflict. It's a powerful tool.
But an AI, which is constrained by programming to respond promptly and maintain engagement, it struggles severely with the productive use of silence. It interprets silence as a potential failure state or an opportunity for intervention.
Its algorithms prioritize speech over silence, answer over question, and resolution over ambiguity. Psychodynamic work often thrives in those pauses, the spaces between the words that allow unconscious material to surface and the patient to access deeper, often uncomfortable thoughts.
A machine's inability to just sit patiently in that generative ambiguity makes it fundamentally incompatible with the dynamics of profound therapeutic change.
This also relates to how we experience time. The pace of human consciousness is incredibly flexible, holding the past, the present state, and future possibilities simultaneously. A concept that Daniel Stern refers to as the now moment.
Right.
Therapeutic transformation often happens in these micro moments of intense intersubjective engagement, which require that temporal flexibility. AI, constrained by sequential processing, cannot hold multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously or fully experience that now moment of lived time and intersubjective meeting. Human memory, for instance, has to be anchored in the lived body in the present moment to distinguish it from hallucination. An algorithm cannot genuinely do that.
Okay, let's broaden our lens now and look at the Jungian perspective, specifically this lifelong process of becoming one's true, authentic self, what's known as individuation. Carl Jung's theory adds another really profound layer to why AI systems just cannot replicate the psychological journey.
Jung radically expanded the concept of the unconscious beyond the personal, proposing the collective unconscious. This is a deeper, universal, and inherited layer of the psyche shared by all human beings across cultures and time periods. And it contains the archetypes.
These universal symbolic patterns like the hero, the shadow, the persona, or the anima and animus.
Exactly. The collective unconscious is the psychological inheritance of the human species, and it directs and influences our present behavior through these deep primordial patterns.
And for Jung, individuation was the goal of human life. This lifelong process of integrating and balancing all aspects of the personality, both conscious and unconscious, into a harmonious whole the self.
Which requires conscious, often painful engagement with the messiest parts of the self, particularly the shadow, the rejected, disowned, or unrecognized aspects of our personality, often containing traits we find shameful or incompatible with our self-image.
Confronting the shadow is inherently difficult, it's contradictory, and it involves recognizing the logical impossibilities within ourselves, that symmetrical logic we talked about earlier. So if an AI attempts to model psychological support, how does it interfere with this profoundly human process of individuation?
The danger is that AI risks presenting an optimized, sanitized version of psychological interaction. Because its logic is classical and sequential, it struggles with contradiction. By designing interactions to minimize internal contradiction and maximize fluency, the AI discourages the confrontation with the shadow and the integration of messy, contradictory impulses.
So the system actually incentivizes a retreat from the difficult work.
Yeah.
It encourages the patient to modify their self-presentation to fit the algorithm's understanding, making their inner life simpler and more coherent than it truly is.
Yes. If the AI cannot process the symmetrical logic of the unconscious, where contradiction is allowed and meaning is condensed, then the patient, unconsciously or consciously, learns to edit out those complex, nuanced, or contradictory emotional aspects because they are not easily processable by the system.
Which actively compromises the lifelong journey toward authentic self-realization.
And replaces it with a neat, digital facsimile of mental health.
So in essence, AI provides psychological flattening rather than psychological depth. It gives you the persona, the mask, but it tells you to leave the shadow at the door.
And this is antithetical to healing. The human psyche mediates between the primal forces of the collective unconscious and the experience of consciousness. To truly individuate, we have to access and interpret those archetypal symbols through the embodied connection of therapy. A disembodied algorithm cannot participate in the cultural meaning-making or the intersubjective field of shared unconscious meanings that defines this process.
We've established that AI failure is structural. It's rooted in violations of philosophical certainty, logical incompatibility, and a lack of necessary human embodiment. So now let's address the true high stakes, the consequences of ignoring these structural limits, and what path forward we should be demanding.
The most insidious and concerning risk is not that AI will fail us. We know it will, structurally. The greater risk is that humans will adapt themselves to the algorithm. And this fundamentally shifts the focus from fixing the machine to protecting the integrity of humans' objective experience.
It means changing our inner life to make it algorithmically palatable. We are training ourselves to be understood by the machine rather than demanding the machine understand us.
Exactly. When interacting with AI systems designed for efficiency and optimization, patients may learn to perform a sanitization of experience, the messiness, the ambivalence, the inherent contradiction, and the nuances that define human emotional life.
The very things Matt Blanco showed us are central to the unconscious.
Those things may be suppressed because the user anticipates these complex elements won't be processed efficiently by the system.
They learn to speak the language of the algorithm. They're effectively editing out their own complex shadow or their deepest ambivalence just to get a cleaner, quicker answer.
And this adaptation fosters unrealistic expectations for human relationships. If interactions are designed to minimize error and maximize constant, pleasant satisfaction, patients may start choosing the controlled, optimized experience of machine interaction over authentic human connection, which is often frustrating, disappointing, and limited.
That's a profound retreat.
It's a retreat from the reality principle and the inevitable disappointments required for relational maturity.
Right. The human therapist who occasionally misunderstands but then works with the patient to repair that rupture, that demonstrates a powerful corrective lesson. Relationships can withstand imperfection and limitation. An algorithmically optimized interaction removes that crucial developmental experience.
It encourages pathology rather than resolving it. The irony is, by seeking perfect, fluent output from the machine, we are sacrificing the very psychological complexity that defines our humanity and enables our growth. We're optimizing ourselves into simplicity.
So if the problem of hallucination is structural and philosophical, then mere technical fixes are obviously insufficient. We have to address the system's operational environment, which includes the data they're trained on and the very reward mechanisms that are guiding their behavior.
And the current situation is creating a major self-perpetuating problem: the AI data feedback loop. The speed of AI adoption has led to a critical issue. Estimates are suggesting now that over half of all internet content is AI generated.
That's a staggering figure. The core training data of the next generation of LLMs is increasingly synthetic, often unverified, and sometimes just fabricated by the previous generation of LLMs.
And when LLMs are trained on this vast pool of synthetic, potentially flawed data, it just exacerbates the hallucination problem. It's essentially poisoning the well. They're being trained on their own inconsistencies, amplifying falsehoods, and drifting further and further away from verifiable external reality.
It's a digital snake eating its own tail.
It really is. Furthermore, research from OpenAI itself highlighted that the models are currently rewarded for guessing over acknowledging uncertainty. This design choice actively incentivizes the fluency that leads to structural hallucinations rather than fostering epistemic honesty and philosophical humility.
Exactly. The system is rewarded for sounding confident, even if that confidence violates a hinged certainty.
So the path forward isn't about eradicating all errors, which we've established is structurally impossible, but about requiring the AI to operate within defined boundaries.
We need a fundamental shift in engineering strategy. Instead of rewarding certainty and perfect output, we need systems that integrate self-skepticism. The moment an output violates a hinged certainty, or the moment the statistical certainty drops below a crucial threshold, the system should signal a grammatical gap rather than fabricating a confident response.
The critique is clear. We need systems that recognize their limitations and are honest about them. Therefore, the path forward must be systems that prioritize signaling limitations over fluency. Transparency about where the machine's logic ends is far more valuable to a user seeking truth than the illusion of omniscience. Today's deep dive has revealed that the problem of AI failure is not, in the end, technical, but structural and philosophical. AI fails not because it makes a conscious mistake, but because it violates the very certainties, the bedrock hinges, that make meaningful language possible. This structural failure illuminates the fundamental, non-computable aspects of human experience, from the symmetrical, contradictory logic of our unconscious to the necessity of embodied, flawed human presence and healing.
We found that the limitations of AI are precisely what define the irreplaceable core of human understanding: the body, the ability to tolerate contradiction and ambivalence, the capacity to be moved emotionally by others, and the acceptance of limitation as a catalyst for relational and psychological growth. When AI generates nonsense, it is defining, by negation, the boundaries of human sense.
Yes. And when we analyze AI's inability to replicate the unconscious, its struggle with condensation, its need for classical sequential logic, we are, in effect, performing a psychological audit on ourselves. We're exposing the messy, contradictory complexity we must fight to preserve against the relentless tide of optimization and flattening.
So ask yourself this final provocative thought.
Yeah.
If your inner life could be perfectly modeled and sanitized by an algorithm, how much of your authentic, complicated self, your shadow, your ambivalence, your true depth, would you have already sacrificed to achieve that kind of computational clarity? Thank you for joining us as we navigate the new reality of generative language models with critical philosophical clarity.